Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. In this video, we're starting the first lesson of Module 8, Contract Time Administration. We'll be talking about time-related clauses in construction contracts and what they mean for managing a project on schedule. In this lesson, we'll go over key time-related terms in construction contracts, like contract time, workdays, liquidated damages, unavoidable delays, etc., and why they matter for managing contracts effectively. First, let's review some key terms related to different points in time throughout a construction project, from initiation to closeout. Along this timeline, there are several important milestones, including the date of contract signing, notice to proceed, contract start date, and substantial completion date. All right, before the contract is signed, the procurement process takes place to select a contractor. Once the contract is executed by all parties, the owner issues a notice to proceed. This notice specifies the date on which the contractor is officially authorized to begin work. This date becomes the contract start date. The contract also specifies the contract time, which is the total number of calendar days or work days allocated to complete the project. Based on this duration and the start date, the contract completion date is determined. If the contractor achieves substantial completion after the contract completion date, this may be considered a breach of contract, and the difference in time is treated as a total delay. Depending on the reason for the delay, the contractor may be eligible for a time extension. If the delay is deemed excusable, the extension allows the contractor to avoid liquidated damages that would otherwise be assessed for late completion. Since these milestones are critical to the success of a construction project, their definitions must be clearly and precisely stated in the construction contract. Now, let's take a closer look at each of these terms. We'll discuss their roles and go over example provisions from actual contracts. Now, let's talk about the notice to proceed. This is the formal document that marks the official start date of the project. Until the contractor receives the notice to proceed, no actual construction time is counted. Here's a typical clause you might see in a contract. The contractor shall commence work under this contract on the date the notice to proceed is received from the owner and shall fully complete the project within 100 consecutive calendar days. So what does that really mean? It means the contractor's countdown starts not when the contract is signed and not when the team mobilizes, but only when the owner issues the notice to proceed. This provision protects both sides. It gives the owner time to get all pre-construction approvals in place, and it gives the contractor a clear signal for when the clock starts ticking. It also helps avoid disputes later over whether delays happened before or after the project actually began. In many ways, this is the first key milestone in the life of a construction project. This is a sample notice to proceed, a formal document that authorizes the contractor to begin the work. A typical notice to proceed includes key details such as the recipient and sender, issue date, contract number, and basic project information. For example, the project address and the total contract amount. A crucial element of the notice is the specification of contract time. In this example, the time is defined as a set number of consecutive calendar days starting from a designated commencement date. Based on this, the contract completion date is calculated and clearly stated. Additionally, the notice may also include information about liquidated damages, the predetermined amount the contractor must pay for each day of delay beyond the agreed completion date. It's important to note that much of this information is typically outlined in the original contract as well, and is reaffirmed in the notice to proceed. As we've just learned, the time allowed for project completion is typically stated in the notice to proceed. It is also included in the contract itself. In the contract, this time frame is formally established as part of the agreement between the owner and the contractor. It sets expectations for how long the work should take and defines the type of time measurement to be used, such as calendar days or working days. For projects that are critical or have a significant impact on traffic or public services, calendar days or a fixed completion date are generally preferred, since they simplify the administration of time charges. On the other hand, working days are more suitable for projects where timely completion is less critical. They offer more flexibility by only counting days when work is actually performed. Now, let's look at a couple of examples. In some contracts, you might see a clause like this. The contractor shall commence work under this contract on the date the notice to proceed is received from the owner and shall fully complete the project within 100 consecutive calendar days. In this case, time is tracked continuously, weekends, holidays, and every day counts. Using calendar days helps prevent disagreements about whether a certain day counts, which could otherwise lead to disputes. But in other contracts, you might find the contractor shall complete all work required under this contract within 120 working days from the date of the notice to proceed. Here, only actual work days are counted, typically Monday through Friday, excluding holidays and approved non-work days. Remember, working days can vary by country, region, or even company. Therefore, contracts often include a specific definition of working day, which we'll look at in an example later. So why does this matter? Well, because how you define the time of completion will directly impact how the project is scheduled, how delays are measured, and whether the contractor could be liable for damages due to late completion. Either way, it's essential that both parties clearly understand how time is being measured, and that it's explicitly stated in the contract. Another critical milestone of the project is substantial completion. It is used to define the point of contract completion. Delays in achieving substantial completion are considered a breach of contract, and they can trigger the assessment of liquidated damages against the contractor. Because of its critical role in the project timeline and payment process, the definition of substantial completion must be carefully worded. Any vagueness or confusion can lead to serious disputes between the contractor and the owner regarding final payment, risk transfer, and warranty periods. Here is one example of substantial completion language. As provided by the General Services Administration Manual, GSM, the work shall be deemed substantially complete if and only if the contractor has completed the work and related contract obligations in accordance with the contract documents, such that the government may enjoy the intended access, occupancy, possession, and use of the entire work without impairment due to incomplete or deficient work, and without interference from the contractor's completion of remaining work or correction of deficiencies in completed work. This clause makes 2 points very clear. First, the owner must be able to fully use and occupy the project for its intended purpose without being held back by unfinished work. Second, the presence of contractors still finishing minor punch list items should not interfere with that use. Basically, substantial completion protects the owner's right to use the project, and it protects the contractor's right to move toward the final payment. It marks a major transition point in construction management, and that's why it's absolutely essential to define it precisely in the contract. As mentioned earlier, when the substantial completion milestone is delayed, the contractor may need to pay liquidated damages. Now, let's take a closer look at what the liquidated damages provision actually is. It is basically intended to require the contractor to compensate the client, usually the owner or the government, for estimated losses if the contractor fails to achieve substantial completion on time. Major causes behind liquidated damages can include things like loss of revenue, extra storage costs, rental costs for temporary facilities, additional equipment expenses, or even supply chain disruptions caused by the delay. The key point here is that with liquidated damages provision, the client does not have to prove their actual damages in court. Instead, the contract specifies a fixed daily amount ahead of time, making enforcement much simpler and more predictable. Here's an example, a clause taken directly from the General Services Administration Manual, or GSAM. If the contractor fails to achieve substantial completion of the work within the time specified in the contractor shall be liable to the government for liquidated damages at the rate specified for each calendar day following the required completion date that the work is not substantially complete. If the contract requires different completion dates for different phases or portions of the work, the contractor shall be liable for liquidated damages at the specified rate for each calendar day following the required completion date that the phase or portion of the work is not substantially complete. If a single rate is specified, the specified rate shall be apportioned between the different phases or portions of the work. If the government elects to accept any portion of the work not specifically designated as a phase or portion of work with its own required completion date, the liquidated damage rate shall be apportioned between accepted work and uncompleted work, and the contractor's liability for liquidated damages shall be computed accordingly. In simple terms, this means that if the project has multiple parts or milestones, the contractor could face liquidated damages separately for each delayed part, not just for the entire project. It also means that if the government accepts a portion of the project early, the liquidated damages are adjusted to fairly reflect only the work that remains incomplete. At the end of the day, liquidated damages are an important risk management tool. They encourage timely performance, reduce the need for expensive legal battles, and protect the client from hidden or hard-to-quantify financial impacts caused by delays. Again, it's important to remember, as long as the project reaches substantial completion on time, the contractor will not owe any liquidated damages. However, substantial completion doesn't mean the entire contract is finished. The contractor must still fully complete all the remaining work, including minor fixes and punch list items, in order to receive final payment. This is where another important provision comes into play, a provision specifically meant to establish the conditions under which the contractor is entitled to final payment and the release of retainage. Let's look at an example of this type of clause, taken directly from the General Services Administration Manual. 1. The contract is complete if and only if the contractor has completed all work and related contract obligations, corrected all deficiencies in all punch list items, and complied with all conditions for final payment. 2. The contractor shall not be entitled to final payment or release of any retainage held by the government until after contract completion. If the contractor does not achieve contract completion within the time required by this contract, the government shall be entitled, after providing notice to the contractor, to complete any work remaining unfinished. The contractor shall be liable to the government for all costs incurred by the government to complete such work. In other words, substantial completion gives the owner the right to occupy and use the project, but final completion is what triggers full financial closure, including the release of any withheld funds. If the contractor fails to fully complete the project in the required time, the owner or the government can step in, finish the remaining work, and charge the contractor for the extra costs. This protects the owner from being left with an incomplete or defective project after already making most of the payments. Alright, that concludes the first part of this lesson on time provisions in construction contracts. We covered contract provisions related to key project milestones, including notice to proceed, time of completion, substantial completion, and final contract completion. We'll explore a few other important time-related provisions in an upcoming video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.